"You are standing in the wrong place," someone whispered as the silver invitation slipped from Evelyn Carter's trembling fingers and drifted onto the polished marble floor. Yet when she bent to retrieve it, she noticed something no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. The ancient moon crest stamped into the wax was glowing with a soft silver light. The invitation had arrived at her tiny cottage before sunrise without a messenger, without a royal seal, and without any explanation. Most people in Ash Hollow believed it had to be a mistake. After all, Evelyn had spent the last 4 years carrying a title no Omega ever wanted. Rejected, forgotten, invisible. Once, she had dreamed about standing inside the royal palace like every young Omega who believed destiny might still remember her name. Those dreams had disappeared the afternoon her former mate publicly turned away from her without anger, without hatred, and somehow that quiet dismissal had hurt far more than shouting ever could. Since then, people rarely looked at her directly. Shopkeepers served others before her. Children repeated the cruel jokes they heard from adults. Even neighbors who had once smiled now lowered their eyes as if loneliness itself could spread from one person to another. So when the invitation appeared, Evelyn assumed someone wanted another reason to laugh. She almost threw it into the fireplace. Instead, she folded it carefully and placed it inside the pocket of her faded blue cloak. If it truly was a joke, she decided she would face it with dignity. The journey to the capital took nearly 6 hours by carriage. Towering white pines lined the winding road, their branches glittering beneath the late autumn sun, while distant castle spires slowly rose beyond the hills like silver mountains touching the clouds. Every mile made Evelyn wonder whether she should turn back. Every mile reminded her she no longer belonged anywhere. By the time the carriage reached the palace gates, dozens of elegant alpha and beta families had already gathered beneath banners embroidered with wolves and crescent moons. Jewel-colored gowns shimmered beneath crystal lanterns. Rich laughter floated through the courtyard. Expensive perfumes mixed with the scent of cedar and fresh rain. Evelyn stepped down carefully, smoothing the wrinkles from her simple ivory dress. It was beautiful once, years ago, before countless careful stitches repaired worn sleeves and faded hems. Compared to everyone else, she looked like a memory that had wandered into the wrong celebration. A pair of noble women paused beside the entrance. One glanced toward Evelyn, then quietly whispered something that made the other cover her smile behind a jeweled fan. Neither insult reached Evelyn clearly, but she recognized the expression immediately. She had seen it too many times to mistake its meaning. She lowered her eyes and continued walking. The palace doors stood open beneath towering stone wolves carved centuries earlier. Every guest presented an invitation before entering. When Evelyn finally reached the front of the line, the royal steward accepted her silver envelope with practiced indifference. His expression changed the instant he broke the wax seal. Confusion flickered across his face. He turned the invitation toward the light, examining it twice before stepping aside without saying a word. Several attendants exchanged uncertain glances, but none stopped her. Evelyn noticed their hesitation. So did everyone waiting behind her. Quiet murmurs drifted through the line as she entered the enormous hall. Hundreds of crystal candles reflected across polished marble floors until the room resembled a sky filled with stars. Music echoed softly beneath vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of ancient moon queens. Every conversation seemed brighter than the last, yet somehow Evelyn felt colder with every step. She searched for an empty corner where she could disappear without disturbing anyone. That had become her greatest talent, becoming invisible before people asked her to leave. As she reached the edge of the ballroom, she noticed something strange. Several portraits of former queens lined the eastern wall. One portrait depicted a young woman wearing no crown, only a simple blue cloak remarkably similar to Evelyn's own. The resemblance unsettled her enough that she stepped closer. Before she could study it further, a warm voice behind her quietly asked, "Do you always hide from rooms that were waiting for you?" Evelyn turned, startled. Standing only a few feet away was a tall man dressed entirely in black. His cloak carried no crest. His gloves concealed his hands. His calm silver-gray eyes studied her with quiet curiosity rather than judgment. He looked like an ordinary traveler who had somehow wandered into a royal celebration, yet nothing about his posture felt ordinary. He carried himself with effortless confidence, the kind that never needed to announce itself. Evelyn offered a polite smile before lowering her gaze again. "I think you have mistaken me for someone else," she answered softly. "People usually do." The stranger looked toward the glowing invitation still resting inside the steward's hands across the hall. Then he looked back at Evelyn with the faintest hint of surprise crossing his face, as though he had just discovered something he had spent years searching for. Before either of them could speak again, a ceremonial bell rang once across the palace, silencing every conversation inside the grand hall. The deep, resonant bell echoed through the grand hall until even the smallest whisper surrendered to silence. Hundreds of guests turned toward the marble staircase where the royal ceremony would soon begin, while Evelyn Carter quietly stepped backward, hoping the crowd would forget she had ever entered. It had always been easier that way. If no one noticed her, no one could remind her that she did not belong. The stranger dressed in black remained only a few steps away, watching the gathering with calm, unreadable eyes. He did not seem interested in the jeweled gowns or the proud alpha heirs eager to impress the royal court. Instead, his attention drifted back to Evelyn each time she tried to disappear into another corner of the room. She pretended not to notice. Moments later, elegant attendants moved through the ballroom, carrying silver trays filled with crystal glasses and embroidered ribbons bearing the names of honored guests. Every ribbon represented a seat inside the Circle of the Moon, the most prestigious section of the palace, reserved for those considered worthy of standing near the royal throne. Guests smiled proudly as they accepted their ribbons. When an attendant reached Evelyn, however, she paused. Confusion crossed the young woman's face as she searched the list once, then twice. Finally, she lowered her voice. "I am sorry, Miss Carter. Your name is not assigned to any seating section." Nearby conversations immediately slowed. Curious eyes shifted toward Evelyn. Someone quietly laughed. Another guest whispered that the invitation must have been forged. A richly dressed noblewoman wearing emerald silk stepped forward with an amused smile. Lady Victoria Hawthorne had built a reputation for elegance, charm, and the subtle art of humiliating people without ever raising her voice. She examined Evelyn from head to toe before speaking just loudly enough for those around them to hear. How unfortunate. Someone clearly forgot that invitations are not the same as acceptance. Several guests smiled politely. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Evelyn felt warmth rise into her cheeks. She had experienced moments like this before. Different faces, different towns, always the same silence afterward. She reached into her pocket and carefully removed the silver invitation once more. The glowing moon crest still shimmered faintly beneath the ballroom lights. "There must be some mistake," she said gently. "This invitation was delivered to my home." Lady Victoria accepted the card between two fingers as though it were an odd curiosity. Her smile faded the instant she noticed the ancient silver seal. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her expression before she quickly concealed it. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very convincing craftsmanship." She handed the invitation back without another glance. Even the finest imitation cannot change who receives it. Soft laughter spread through the nearby crowd. Evelyn folded the invitation again with careful hands. She refused to let anyone see them trembling. Before she could step away, another palace official approached carrying a large leather register filled with the names of every honored guest. He stopped beside Lady Victoria, opened the book, and slowly traced one page after another. His brow tightened. Then he turned another page. His confusion deepened. "That cannot be correct," he whispered almost to himself. Evelyn heard only fragments as he quietly spoke with another steward. Both men glanced toward her before quickly lowering their voices again. Whatever they had discovered, neither seemed prepared to explain it publicly. The uncertainty only encouraged more whispers throughout the ballroom. Some guests believed the palace had made an embarrassing mistake. Others insisted the mysterious invitation was part of an elaborate royal tradition. Evelyn wished only for the floor beneath her feet to carry her safely back outside. She turned toward the nearest hallway, intending to leave before the ceremony officially began. As she reached the towering archway, she noticed an elderly palace servant struggling to steady a stack of embroidered ceremonial banners almost twice his height. One heavy pole slipped from his grasp and rolled across the polished marble floor. Without hesitation, Evelyn hurried forward, and caught it before it struck the ground. The elderly man released a grateful breath. "Thank you," he said quietly. "These old hands are not as dependable as they once were." Evelyn smiled warmly. They carried them this far. That is still something worth honoring. Together they lifted the banners back into place. Neither realized the stranger in black had watched the entire exchange from across the hall. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Around him, ambitious nobles competed for recognition. Yet the one person everyone dismissed had instinctively stopped to help someone who could offer her nothing in return. As the elderly servant departed, he leaned close enough to whisper a single sentence that sent a chill through Evelyn's heart. "Miss Carter," he said with unexpected certainty, "the palace has been waiting for you far longer than you have been waiting for it." Before she could ask what he meant, the ceremonial trumpets sounded from above. The great doors to the royal throne chamber slowly began to open, and every guest instinctively turned toward the light spilling into the ballroom. The enormous doors opened with quiet majesty, revealing a throne chamber unlike anything Evelyn Carter had imagined during the lonely nights when stories of the royal palace were the only escape from ordinary life. Moonlight streamed through towering stained glass windows even though the sun had not yet set, casting silver patterns across the polished marble floor as though the palace itself carried its own sky. Noble families entered confidently, greeting old friends and influential allies with warm smiles while attendants guided them toward carefully assigned places. Evelyn remained near the entrance, uncertain whether taking another step would only invite another moment of embarrassment. She watched as every distinguished guest seemed to know exactly where to stand. Everyone except her. The elderly servant she had helped moments earlier disappeared into a side corridor with surprising speed, leaving only his mysterious words echoing inside her thoughts. "The palace has been waiting for you." She could not understand what that meant. Before she could search for him again, another attendant approached carrying a polished silver tray. Unlike the earlier attendants, this young woman bowed respectfully before offering Evelyn a folded ribbon woven from white silk threaded with delicate silver strands. Evelyn stared in confusion. "There must be another mistake," she said softly. "I was told I did not have a place." The attendant smiled politely without answering. These instructions came directly from the royal chamberlain. Evelyn accepted the ribbon with hesitant fingers. Embroidered across the fabric in elegant silver thread was a single crescent moon unlike any symbol she had seen elsewhere inside the palace. Several nearby nobles immediately noticed it. Their conversations faded into quiet speculation. Lady Victoria Hawthorne stepped closer again, unable to hide the surprise in her expression. Even she recognized the unusual emblem. It belonged to no ordinary guest. Before anyone could question its meaning, the chamberlain himself appeared near the center of the hall. His clear voice carried effortlessly through the room. "Honored guests, today marks the beginning of the moon selection ceremony, a tradition older than the kingdom itself. Every invitation issued this season has been examined according to ancient law. Every guest standing within these walls has entered by rightful invitation." Those final words settled heavily over the room. Several curious eyes shifted toward Evelyn. She lowered her gaze, wishing she could disappear beneath the polished marble floor. She had never wanted attention. She only wanted answers. The musicians began playing a slow, graceful melody while guests took their assigned positions around the circular chamber. Evelyn quietly followed the directions indicated by the ribbon until she reached an empty place along the outer edge of the gathering. She expected someone to stop her. No one did. Instead, another remarkable detail caught her attention. The silver thread woven into her ribbon shimmered faintly every time she stepped beneath the moonlight pouring through the stained glass ceiling. Across the chamber, the stranger dressed in black observed everything in complete silence. He had accepted no ribbon at all, yet none of the palace guards questioned his presence. More strangely still, several senior officials nodded respectfully whenever they passed him. Evelyn noticed the gestures without understanding their meaning. She wondered whether he might be an advisor traveling without formal titles. There was something comforting about his calm expression. Whenever their eyes briefly met across the crowded hall, she no longer felt completely alone. The ceremony continued as ancient names, respected bloodlines, and honored achievements were announced one after another. Applause echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Proud families smiled as they received recognition earned across generations. Evelyn listened quietly, convinced no one would ever speak her name. That certainty lasted only until the moon bell rang for a second time. Every candle inside the chamber flickered at once. A soft silver glow spread outward from the circular floor beneath the guests' feet, revealing delicate patterns carved into the marble centuries earlier. The glowing lines slowly connected until they formed an enormous crescent surrounding everyone present. A collective breath swept through the room. According to ancient tradition, the moon path revealed nothing by accident. It responded only to truth. Evelyn looked down as warmth gently spread beneath her shoes. To her astonishment, the glowing line beneath everyone else remained steady. The one beneath her began moving. Like liquid silver flowing across stone, it quietly separated from the circle and stretched farther into the chamber. Gasps echoed throughout the hall as the luminous path continued forward until it stopped directly before the highest steps leading toward the royal throne. Hundreds of eyes followed its impossible course. Evelyn remained frozen where she stood, unable to breathe, while an uneasy silence settled over the palace. Somewhere beyond the towering throne, hidden from every guest, a familiar calm voice quietly whispered to someone unseen, "It has begun exactly as the prophecy promised." The silver path remained perfectly still, stretching from beneath Evelyn Carter's feet to the lowest step of the royal throne, as though it had existed for centuries only to awaken at this exact moment. No musician continued playing. No servant dared move. Even the countless crystal candles seemed to flicker more slowly, allowing the silence to grow heavier with every passing second. Evelyn looked around the chamber, hoping someone would explain what had just happened, but every face reflected the same mixture of astonishment and uncertainty. Lady Victoria Hawthorne recovered first. A graceful smile returned to her lips, although it no longer reached her eyes. She stepped toward the glowing path and laughed softly. Ancient magic can be unpredictable. Surely no one believes this forgotten Omega was chosen for anything important. A few nervous chuckles answered her, more out of discomfort than agreement. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She wished the light beneath her feet would disappear so the attention surrounding her would finally fade. Instead, the silver glow became brighter. The chamberlain slowly descended the marble staircase, carrying an ancient scroll wrapped in blue silk. His careful movements suggested he understood the weight of every eye watching him. When he reached the glowing path, he paused before Evelyn with visible respect. "Miss Evelyn Carter," he said clearly enough for the entire chamber to hear. "According to palace law, no guest may stand upon the moon path unless called by the blessing itself. I ask only one question. Did anyone instruct you to stand here?" Evelyn gently shook her head. "No, sir. I only followed the place marked on my ribbon." The chamberlain nodded thoughtfully. "Then you have broken no law." Murmurs spread through the nobles once again. Some appeared unsettled. Others exchanged worried glances with family members. Ancient customs carried authority beyond any title, and no one wished to challenge traditions older than the kingdom itself. Across the hall, the mysterious man dressed in black watched every reaction with remarkable calm. His silver-gray eyes never left Evelyn for long. There was quiet pride in his expression, but also something else. Relief, as though he had spent years waiting to witness this single moment. Evelyn noticed him again and found unexpected comfort in his steady presence. She still did not know his name, yet every time fear threatened to overwhelm her, she somehow discovered him nearby. Before she could gather the courage to approach him, another sound echoed through the throne chamber. It was not music. It was the slow turning of ancient gears hidden deep within the palace walls. Every guest instinctively looked upward as enormous stained glass panels shifted almost silently, allowing a broader stream of moonlight to pour into the chamber despite the fading afternoon sky outside. The silver beams crossed one another before settling directly upon the ancient throne standing empty at the far end of the hall. Above it hung the royal crown enclosed inside a crystal case that had remained unopened for generations except during the most sacred ceremonies. The crystal case shimmered once, then twice. Gasps filled the chamber as the lock released itself with a quiet click. No servant touched it. No guard approached it. The case simply opened on its own. Lady Victoria took an uneasy step backward. Even the oldest nobles had never witnessed such a sign. The chamberlain slowly bowed his head toward the throne, speaking almost in a whisper. "The moon has acknowledged a witness." Evelyn barely understood the words. She had come expecting embarrassment, perhaps another reminder that she no longer belonged anywhere. Instead, the palace itself seemed to be responding to her presence, and she could not imagine why. She had never accomplished anything extraordinary. She had never possessed rare gifts or powerful bloodlines. She had simply tried to remain kind after life had given her every reason to become bitter. As uncertainty filled her heart, the elderly servant she had helped earlier quietly appeared once more beside one of the towering columns. This time he was no longer carrying banners. He stood with perfect posture, wearing an expression of quiet dignity that seemed entirely different from before. Their eyes met across the chamber. Instead of gratitude, he offered a respectful bow. Evelyn blinked in surprise. Why would a palace servant bow to her? Before she could ask herself another question, a royal herald struck the marble floor once with an ornate silver staff. His powerful voice rolled across the silent hall. "His Majesty has arrived." Every noble immediately bowed. Every attendant lowered their head. Evelyn instinctively did the same. But before she could look toward the grand entrance, she noticed one impossible detail. The only person who had not moved from his place was the quiet stranger dressed entirely in black. And as the great doors slowly opened behind the throne instead of the entrance, a knowing smile finally touched his face. Every head remained lowered as the royal herald's announcement echoed through the throne chamber. Yet Evelyn Carter could not silence the question racing through her mind. If His Majesty had arrived, why was the mysterious man in black still standing calmly in the middle of the chamber instead of bowing with everyone else? She carefully lifted her eyes for only a heartbeat. At that exact moment, the stranger turned toward her, and for the first time since they had met, he smiled with complete warmth instead of quiet curiosity. It was not the confident smile of a noble seeking admiration. It was the gentle expression of someone relieved that a long journey had finally reached its destination. Before Evelyn could understand what it meant, the enormous doors behind the throne opened completely. Brilliant moonlight flooded the chamber, illuminating every carved pillar and every silver banner hanging from the vaulted ceiling. The chamberlain stepped forward and spoke in a voice filled with respect. "Please welcome the guardian of Moonspire, protector of the Northern Pax, and sovereign of the Silver Crown." The entire room waited for a figure to emerge from the doorway behind the throne. No one appeared. Confused whispers rippled through the crowd. Lady Victoria glanced toward the entrance, then toward the empty throne, clearly uncertain whether some unexpected delay had interrupted the ceremony. The silence stretched for several long seconds before measured footsteps echoed across the marble floor. They did not come from behind the throne. They came from the center of the chamber. Every noble slowly turned. The mysterious traveler dressed in black began walking toward the silver staircase with calm, deliberate steps. Palace guards immediately lowered their ceremonial staffs. Senior advisors bowed even deeper than before. The chamberlain placed one hand over his heart. Evelyn felt her breath catch as realization slowly settled over the room like the first snowfall of winter. The stranger she had spoken with, the man who had listened without judgment, the one who had quietly watched her help others without expecting recognition, continued climbing the marble steps until he reached the ancient throne. He removed his dark gloves first, revealing the royal signet ring engraved with the crest of the silver crown. Then he unclasped the plain black cloak from his shoulders. Rich midnight blue robes embroidered with silver thread shimmered beneath the moonlight. Finally, with one smooth movement, he turned to face the chamber. "Welcome," he said with the same calm voice Evelyn already knew. "I am Nathaniel Ashford." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Some guests immediately dropped to one knee. Others looked stunned that the king had walked among them unnoticed throughout the evening. Evelyn stood completely still. Her mind returned to every quiet conversation they had shared only moments earlier. She remembered apologizing for being in the wrong place. She remembered believing he was an ordinary traveler. Most of all, she remembered how naturally he had spoken to her, never once treating her as someone beneath his attention. Nathaniel's gaze found hers across the chamber despite the hundreds of people standing between them. He did not rush to speak. He allowed the silence to settle, as though he wanted everyone present to witness exactly where his attention rested. Lady Victoria forced a graceful smile and stepped forward with practiced confidence. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing elegantly. "What an extraordinary surprise. We were honored to welcome you in disguise." Nathaniel acknowledged her with a polite nod before asking a simple question. "Did you enjoy the opportunity to reveal your true character while believing no crown was watching?" The question carried no anger, only quiet honesty. Lady Victoria's smile faltered. Around her, several nobles suddenly became very interested in the marble floor beneath their feet. Nathaniel slowly descended one step from the throne platform. "A kingdom is not measured by how it greets its rulers," he continued. "It is measured by how it treats those who appear to have no influence at all." Evelyn felt every word settle deeply within her heart. She had spent years believing kindness accomplished little because almost no one noticed it. Yet somehow this king had noticed everything. He had seen her help the elderly servant. He had watched her remain respectful when others mocked her. He had observed every small decision she believed had gone unseen. Nathaniel's eyes never left hers as he spoke again, this time more softly. "Some of the greatest truths can only be discovered when people believe no one important is watching." The chamber fell silent once more. Then the ancient crown resting inside the open crystal case gave off a gentle silver glow, brighter than it had at any moment that evening, and instead of remaining above the throne, it slowly began to rise into the air on its own. The ancient crown floated effortlessly above the marble floor, surrounded by ribbons of silver light that moved like gentle streams beneath a full moon. No invisible hands held it. No chain suspended it from the ceiling. It simply remained there, graceful and weightless, while every person inside the throne chamber watched in silent disbelief. Even the oldest advisors exchanged astonished glances because no living witness had ever described the crown responding before the conclusion of the moon selection ceremony. King Nathaniel Ashford slowly descended from the throne platform without taking his eyes off Evelyn Carter. He did not reach toward the crown or command it to stop. Instead, he walked with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that certain moments belonged to destiny rather than to kings. Evelyn remained exactly where she stood at the beginning of the glowing moon path. She wished someone would explain what was happening, yet every answer seemed farther away than before. She had arrived expecting nothing more than another reminder that she did not belong among nobles. Now the palace itself seemed to be rewriting every certainty she had carried for years. Nathaniel stopped several feet in front of her. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable despite the hundreds of curious eyes watching every movement. Evelyn searched his face, remembering their earlier conversation in the ballroom. Nothing about his kindness had been false. Even while hiding his identity, he had treated her with the same respect he now offered as king. That realization touched her more deeply than any title possibly could. Nathaniel finally smiled. "You have been wondering why I walked through my own palace without announcing who I was." Evelyn nodded gently. "Yes, Your Majesty. Because a crown can change the answers people give," he replied. "I wanted to hear honest words instead." His calm voice carried throughout the chamber. Many guests welcomed the possibility of royal favor. Others looked only at wealth, influence, or family names. "You never asked who I was. You simply treated every person with the same kindness." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I only did what anyone should do." Nathaniel shook his head almost imperceptibly. "That is precisely why it mattered." Those simple words settled over the room more powerfully than any formal proclamation. Several nobles who had ignored servants throughout the evening suddenly seemed uncomfortable beneath the king's quiet observation. Lady Victoria remained perfectly still, her confident smile now replaced by thoughtful silence. The floating crown drifted another few inches toward the center of the chamber. Its silver light grew brighter, filling every carved pillar with shimmering reflections that resembled moonlit rivers. The chamberlain slowly unrolled the ancient scroll he had carried earlier. His careful voice echoed across the throne room as he read words written centuries before. "When the silver crown awakens before the choosing is complete, let every heart remain humble. For the moon does not seek the loudest voice, the richest house, or the proudest bloodline. It seeks the soul that remembers compassion when no reward is promised." Every sentence seemed to deepen the stillness surrounding Evelyn. She felt countless eyes upon her, yet none of them mattered as much as the quiet sincerity in Nathaniel's expression. She remembered every lonely winter evening after her rejection, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room, every moment she wondered whether her kindness had any value at all. She had survived those years by telling herself that becoming bitter would only allow disappointment to win. She never imagined someone had been watching a path she believed no one noticed. Nathaniel extended one hand toward her, not demanding that she come forward, only offering the choice. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "would you walk with me?" Evelyn hesitated only long enough to steady her breathing before placing her hand in his. The instant their hands touched, the silver path beneath their feet shimmered with renewed brilliance. A soft wave of light traveled from the entrance of the chamber all the way to the throne, illuminating ancient carvings hidden inside the marble for generations. Quiet amazement swept through the gathered guests. No one applauded. No one dared interrupt the moment. Together they began walking along the glowing path at an unhurried pace. Nathaniel matched every step to Evelyn's, never pulling her forward, never walking ahead of her. It felt less like a king leading a subject and more like two travelers arriving at the end of separate journeys. As they reached the foot of the marble staircase, the floating crown descended slightly, stopping only a few feet above them. Then, without warning, the crystal windows surrounding the throne chamber filled with radiant silver light, and an ancient voice, gentle as the evening wind, yet clear enough for every soul to hear, whispered only 4 words. "The forgotten has returned." The gentle voice faded into silence, yet its final words lingered inside every heart gathered within the throne chamber. No one questioned whether they had truly heard it. The crystal windows still shimmered with silver light, and the floating crown remained suspended above Evelyn Carter and King Nathaniel Ashford, as though waiting for something only destiny understood. Evelyn looked around the vast hall, searching the faces surrounding her. Only hours earlier, many of those same people had looked past her without a second thought. Now they watched her with wonder instead of indifference. The sudden change left her more unsettled than comforted. She quietly released a slow breath before lowering her eyes. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "there must be someone more worthy than me." Nathaniel turned toward her with calm certainty. Worthiness is rarely discovered by those who spend their lives trying to prove it. His words carried naturally across the silent chamber. The moon has never chosen the loudest voice. It has always recognized the quiet heart that continues choosing kindness when no one is watching. Evelyn felt emotion rise inside her chest. She remembered repairing her own dress instead of buying a new one because elderly neighbors needed medicine more than she needed comfort. She remembered helping strangers who never learned her name. She remembered every lonely morning when she chose hope instead of resentment, believing those choices would never matter beyond her own conscience. Nathaniel had somehow seen the value hidden inside those ordinary moments. The chamberlain carefully rolled the ancient scroll closed before bowing toward the king. "Your Majesty, the prophecy has continued exactly as recorded." Nathaniel nodded gently, but never looked away from Evelyn. "Not yet," he replied. "There is still one truth left to reveal." Curious whispers swept through the gathered nobles once again. Lady Victoria stood motionless near the front of the assembly, her confident posture replaced by thoughtful reflection. For the first time that evening, she seemed less interested in protecting her reputation than in understanding what she had witnessed. Nearby, the elderly servant Evelyn had helped earlier quietly stepped forward. He removed the plain outer robe that had concealed his appearance throughout the evening. Beneath it, he wore the formal silver robes of the Royal Keeper of Traditions, one of the oldest and most respected offices within the kingdom. A soft wave of surprise passed through the chamber. Evelyn blinked in disbelief. The man she believed to be an ordinary servant smiled warmly. "Forgive my disguise, Miss Carter," he said kindly. "It has long been our custom to observe hearts before announcing names." Evelyn's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "I only helped because you seemed to need help." The elderly keeper smiled even more brightly. "Exactly." Nathaniel gently lifted his hand toward the floating crown, not to claim it, but to acknowledge it. The silver crown has waited for generations because it cannot recognize greatness through power alone. It awakens only when compassion and courage stand together without expecting reward. The crown responded by glowing even more brightly, filling the chamber with soft silver reflections that danced across every polished pillar. Children standing beside noble families gazed upward in silent amazement. Even seasoned palace guards could not hide their smiles. There was no fear inside the room anymore, only quiet wonder. Evelyn slowly looked back toward Nathaniel. "When we first met," she said softly, "I thought you were simply another traveler." Nathaniel laughed quietly, the sound warm enough to ease the tension lingering throughout the hall. "And I hoped you would." He paused before continuing. "Had you known I was the king, you might have spoken differently. Instead, you spoke honestly. That honesty was a gift no title could have purchased." Evelyn remembered every word they had exchanged before learning his identity. She had apologized for standing in the wrong place. She had doubted her own invitation. She had never once asked what he could do for her. Somehow those simple conversations had become more valuable than every grand speech delivered that evening. Nathaniel extended his hand once again, this time not as a ruler issuing a command, but as a man offering trust. Evelyn accepted it with a gentle smile. The instant their hands met, the floating crown slowly descended until it rested between them, neither touching the king's head nor Evelyn's. Instead, it remained suspended at the height of their joined hands, glowing with peaceful light. The chamberlain quietly closed his eyes in reverence. "The final choice," he whispered, "does not belong to the crown alone." Every person inside the throne chamber waited without speaking as the ancient crown continued shining between the king and the once-forgotten Omega, and Nathaniel looked into Evelyn's eyes before asking a question that would change both of their lives forever. "Will you allow your heart to decide before the kingdom does?" The question lingered in the air with remarkable gentleness, carrying none of the pressure expected from a king. Nathaniel Ashford did not ask for an answer as a ruler issuing a command. He asked as a man willing to place his future beside another person's free choice. Evelyn Carter looked into his calm silver-gray eyes and saw no trace of pride, only quiet sincerity. She slowly drew a steady breath before speaking. "For many years I believed my heart no longer mattered to anyone," she said softly. "I stopped expecting people to choose me. I only hoped I would never become someone who stopped choosing kindness." A peaceful smile appeared on Nathaniel's face. "Then your heart has already answered." As though the ancient palace itself had been waiting for those words, the floating crown released a shower of tiny silver lights that drifted through the throne chamber like glowing snowflakes. Children reached upward in wonder, while older nobles watched with respectful silence. Every crystal window reflected the gentle radiance until the entire hall seemed wrapped in moonlight. The royal keeper of traditions stepped forward carrying a small velvet case. Inside rested an elegant silver ring engraved with the same crescent symbol that had appeared on Evelyn's mysterious invitation. He presented it first to Nathaniel before speaking. "Your Majesty, the final tradition belongs not to the court, but to truth. The moon recognizes only promises freely given." Nathaniel accepted the ring, yet instead of placing it on Evelyn's hand immediately, he turned toward the assembled nobles. His voice remained calm, but every word reached the farthest corner of the chamber. "Tonight, every person gathered here has witnessed something greater than a royal ceremony. You have witnessed the difference between status and character. Titles can be inherited. Wealth can be accumulated. Influence can be negotiated. But compassion must be chosen every single day." His gaze slowly moved across the room, meeting the eyes of nobles, advisors, servants, and guards alike. "If this kingdom wishes to remain strong, let no child believe that kindness is weakness or that dignity belongs only to those born into privilege." The chamber remained silent, not because anyone feared speaking, but because no one wished to interrupt the truth unfolding before them. Lady Victoria Hawthorne quietly stepped away from the front of the gathering and approached Evelyn with measured steps. Her proud expression had softened into genuine humility. She lowered her head respectfully. "Miss Carter," she said, "I judged you before I knew you. I believed appearances revealed worth. I was mistaken." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment before offering a warm smile. "We all have another chance to choose differently." There was no bitterness in her voice, only grace. Several nobles exchanged thoughtful glances. Others followed Lady Victoria's example by bowing respectfully toward Evelyn, not because they had been ordered to do so, but because they recognized the quiet strength they had overlooked. Nathaniel watched the moment with quiet satisfaction. This was the kingdom he had always hoped to build, one where humility carried greater honor than pride. The floating crown descended a little farther until it hovered only inches above Evelyn's head. Yet it still did not settle. The royal keeper smiled knowingly. One final truth remains. Nathaniel turned back toward Evelyn. When we first met, you believed you had entered the wrong place. Evelyn laughed softly through grateful tears. I remember every word. Nathaniel nodded. You were never standing in the wrong place. The world simply had not yet recognized where you belonged. The silver path beneath their feet brightened one final time. Ancient carvings hidden throughout the marble floor awakened together, forming a magnificent circle surrounding the king and the once-forgotten Omega. Every guest instinctively stepped back, leaving only the two of them within the glowing light. The floating crown slowly lowered until it rested gently upon Evelyn's head without anyone touching it. It fit perfectly, as though crafted for her alone. A quiet breath of amazement swept through the chamber. Nathaniel looked at her with unmistakable warmth before speaking the words that every heart present would remember for generations. You once believed you were nobody. His voice grew even softer. You are my queen. The instant those words were spoken, the silver light surrounding them blossomed across the entire throne chamber, and every bell within Moonspire Palace began ringing together in joyful harmony, announcing to the kingdom that destiny had finally revealed the one it had been patiently waiting for all along. The joyful ringing of the palace bells spread far beyond the marble walls of Moonspire, rolling across quiet forests, peaceful villages, and distant mountains where generations had grown up believing that greatness belonged only to those born into powerful families. Before sunrise the next morning, the story had already begun traveling from home to home. Yet as the tale passed from one voice to another, people discovered that the most remarkable part was not that a forgotten Omega had become queen. The miracle was that she had never allowed hardship to change the kindness inside her heart. Standing beside King Nathaniel Ashford beneath the silver banners of the throne chamber, Queen Evelyn Carter looked at the people surrounding her with the same gentle eyes they had seen before the crown rested upon her head. Nothing about her warmth had changed. She greeted palace servants with sincere gratitude. She thanked the musicians who had filled the hall with beautiful melodies. She even smiled warmly toward Lady Victoria Hawthorne, whose eyes now reflected genuine respect instead of quiet pride. Lady Victoria stepped forward one final time and bowed deeply. Your Majesty, she said softly, I hope one day I will become the kind of person who would have welcomed you before I knew your worth. Evelyn gently raised her from the bow. That day begins with the choice you make today. There was no bitterness in her voice because she understood something few people ever learned. Forgiveness did not erase the past. It allowed the future to become better than the past. Nathaniel watched the exchange with quiet admiration. This was exactly why destiny had chosen her. Not because she had never suffered. Not because she had never been rejected. But because she refused to let rejection become the measure of her identity. The royal keeper of traditions smiled as he closed the ancient scroll for the final time. For centuries, he said, many believed the prophecy was about a crown searching for its queen. We were only partly correct. The prophecy was truly about a kingdom searching for the example it had forgotten. His words settled peacefully throughout the chamber. One by one, nobles, advisors, guards, and servants bowed together, not out of obligation, but from shared respect. There were no separate ranks in that moment, only grateful hearts witnessing the beginning of a brighter future. As evening approached, Nathaniel and Evelyn stepped onto the palace balcony overlooking thousands of people gathered below. Silver lanterns illuminated the city streets while children laughed beneath strings of glowing lights. Families stood shoulder to shoulder without caring about titles or status because hope had become more important than appearance. Nathaniel looked toward Evelyn and smiled. Do you remember what you told me when we first met? She laughed softly. I believed I was standing in the wrong place. Nathaniel gently shook his head. You were always walking toward the place where you belonged. The road was simply longer than either of us expected. Evelyn rested her hands upon the cool stone railing and watched the moon rise above the kingdom. For years she had believed that being forgotten meant she had no purpose. Now she understood that every lonely season had quietly shaped the compassion that destiny would one day ask her to share with an entire kingdom. She turned toward Nathaniel with peaceful confidence. If there is one promise I wish every child in this kingdom would remember, it is this. Never decide your value by the way someone else treats you. Your character is built by the choices you make when no one is applauding. Nathaniel reached for her hand, and together they looked across the land they would serve, not as rulers seeking admiration, but as guardians determined to lead with humility, fairness, and compassion. Above them the full moon shone brighter than ever, its gentle light touching every roof, every forest, and every quiet road where someone might still believe they were invisible. And somewhere beyond the silver clouds, the ancient blessing that had waited through countless generations seemed to whisper one final truth carried gently upon the evening wind. The world may overlook a kind heart for a season, but destiny never does, because true strength remains gentle, and love always finds those who refuse to stop believing in hope.